Thank you all for joining today. I am Taylor Anderson, Marketing Specialist at Success Computer Consulting. And today our subject matter expert, Jamie Wolbeck, VP of Tech Ops at Success, is here to provide some insight and expertise on staffing your IT team. Some of the things he'll cover are defining the purpose for hiring an IT role, when to hire and what to hire for, how to navigate turnover, verifying that you have the right person for the job, and how to leverage a managed service provider to make sure you're getting the maximum benefit for your business and your IT team. We'll leave some time at the end for questions, like we mentioned, and Jamie is happy to stick around afterward for anyone who would like to discuss any of these topics further. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Jamie.
Okay, well, let me do a little bit more of an introduction here. So again, my name's Jamie Wolbeck. I'm the Vice President of Tech Ops at Success. I've been with Success for 15 years. We're a managed service provider. We oversee 200 businesses. That's about 15 to 18,000 users at any given point in time that we work with. And through my time here and even prior, I've spent a lot of time interviewing individuals that are looking to either work as a part of a managed service provider and or work for a business and an organization in their IT department. And so through that, I've helped kind of collaborate with businesses and get a good understanding of what organizational needs those businesses have and what they're looking to accomplish. Now, often those businesses are coming back with some of the same questions. And so I've taken a lot of those questions and put the answers as we walk through this. So again, I've got probably 25 slides or so of just sort of content that we'll be going through. And I've got the answers laid out. So it's almost like a version of Jeopardy we're going to be going through here, where I'm going to talk through some of the answers to these questions and then give the question at the end. But if you have your own specific questions about IT needs for your organization, I'd be really happy to help kind of work on those later on. But I ask that you save those questions for the end as we go through this, and I hope to answer some of them as we go along this presentation. All right. So again, the agenda is listed out here, and I wish that I had a silver bullet to give you that is, this is the thing you need to do, whether or not you're trying to hire or whether you're trying to find an individual for your organization or create a role or just solve some of the IT concerns that you may have, but there isn't one. So the information that I have in this is a series of answers to those questions in different ways. And I've taken some of the hotter topics that we tend to hear and I've heard over the course of the last 20 years. So with those businesses coming to us looking to either hire, replace, coach IT people, I've put some of those tactics in there that you can use as we go through this, and you get some of those tips that might hold true for what you need in your organization. I'm going to run through this agenda and maybe give a little bit more detail behind it before I kick into it. So there's kind of an overarching theme here, which is what technology has to do with business. And I'll be referring back to that in different ways and what the technology sector means to even just the US economy. I'll talk about how you think about purpose in your organization, what that means from an IT perspective, when to look at hiring, why to hire, how you find a resource, and not so much about the sourcing of candidates, but what to ask them. And then we'll talk about what happens when inevitably there's some level of churn in the organization and what to do there. And at the tail end here, we'll talk a little bit about co-managed and what that actually is and what that means and how that might help your business. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the tech sector here. So the tech sector is one of the largest growing segments of the US economy. It's the third largest. And most of these stats that I pulled here are from 2019, end of 2019. So they're a little dated. And I looked up some of the additional information, and the technology worker segment here that's listed at 8%, that's actually higher now. So there is a clear and growing continued demand for technology workers throughout the US, whether it's for an individual business or whether it's for a large organization that just works in the tech sector. Now, the other side of that is, since there is so much growth and so much churn, so to speak, there, the tenure of an entry-level technician is less than 2 years. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in specific, because later on in this, I have another stat, which is from last year, what the actual churn rate is. And most of the time when organizations go out and find an IT person, They bring them in as a entry-level individual or something maybe mid-level. We kind of refer to that as level 1 or level 2. Those individuals that can do baseline support work, help you with the desktop. Maybe if the network's down, kind of jump on it right away and might need some assistance to get things back up and running. But for the day-to-day kind of operations that people need with their technology, they cover off on most of that. When those individuals are brought in, it's almost like you just started a timer. And in less than 24 months, that person is going to be looking for different opportunities. And so we're going to talk some of that isn't solvable, so to speak, but there's a larger part of this if you're looking to extend it, which some of these tactics will help you do. It's not fully in your control. So we're going to talk about what to do about it as we go through this. All right. Now, when we look at small businesses themselves, usually a small business, when they're looking to either hire an IT person or build out an IT practice, they're going to just bring something on related to IT. They're looking to solve one of 3 key problems. Now, there's more than this, but these are the big ones. So when we think about what it takes to have IT working within an organization, usually a business is looking for an IT person because they're in some level of technology pain. So they believe, the business believes the solution is, hey, if I hire a person, we can get out of this technology pain. Now, what that means is they're feeling what would be too many surprises in their organization. So surprise is kind of correlated with technology pain. That could be because of expense, because of outages, just kind of reoccurring issues that are occurring. So when we think about technology pain, when they want to hire a person, they're thinking, hey, if I hire an individual, that pain will go away, or at least I have a person that can work on resolving that pain. All right. Next, there's this big cloud of uncertainty around technology security, especially in a small business. It's really hard to know where you stand. And so there's that fear that's out there, which is around, hey, is somebody watching this? Is somebody minding the store around security? And when they don't know what's missing and they don't know how to get that information. And so sometimes the thought is, hey, if I bring in an IT person, they can handle that security component. And so that's what they're looking to solve when they are wanting to bring in an IT individual for their organization. Now, finally, there's this other kind of key piece, and to some degree it overlaps with the former two, but the business itself often has projects related to IT to allow it to expand its capabilities. So there might be an IT project that allows them to move to a new system. There might be the search for some new technology or implementing a technology that's already been chosen, which just isn't getting completed, whether it's working with another vendor or just what have you. They need somebody to help shepherd that. So the thought is, across these 3 kind of core pain points or needs, that if you hire an IT person, these things get solved. Now, that's the goal, and that doesn't always connect directly. Usually when an IT person is brought in, there's been an immediate uptick or attention paid on something that needs to happen, and then there's this plateau that happens afterwards, and some question marks around what is occurring on a day-to-day basis. We'll talk a little bit about that, but just to set some context here, this is usually why small businesses are coming to us and asking these questions, or if they have an IT person, what they need to do about it. So I'm going to extend that out into a little bit of the purposeful conversation here as we move along. So purpose is really setting a definition behind what you are hiring a technology professional for. Now, this is really important. Now, oftentimes what occurs is a business's concept behind hiring an IT person is that they will handle IT. If an IT professional is brought into the organization, they've got it covered. All of IT is solved because there's an IT person there. Now, unfortunately, what usually gets solved is some of the initial pain points, but there's this under layer of other things that may be known or unknown that need attention as well. And so too often there's this massive list of responsibilities, and that first IT hire or maybe replacement IT hire steps into this huge list, and of which there is probably a shorter list of what this is the absolute needs here. And then there's a lot of nice to have. And those lists get mixed together, and the IT person on a day-to-day basis is running around quite a bit trying to solve for all of it. and they can wind up being behind, and the business starts looking at, well, geez, this guy's always busy, but I don't know what they're actually getting done on a day-to-day basis. And so while the pain points initially start to get addressed, new pain points and new challenges start to arise, and they are getting addressed slowly or more slowly. And so the question comes up around what that person is doing, and that's often what we get asked to help solve. And so I'm going to make a bridge here into how we think about purpose and how to set some of that context as we move forward. Okay. So again, focusing on kind of the need to have right up front is really important. The nice to haves are good, but building that list out and understanding some of that purpose is important here. So uh, let's talk about what IT actually does, or what technology does in a business. So it's a vast complex, and I'm not going to read off everything that we have in these slides, but uh, that single worker stepping in, and if it's your first IT person, or even a team or a small team in your business, they are expected to work on anything that plugs into the wall. If it's uses electricity, it's for the business, the IT person has some responsibility for it, and that becomes kind of their full purpose. And that's not exactly an effective way to look at it. So technology should be advancing the business in some way, and to allow that to happen, that requires projects to happen on a fairly regular basis to move to new technologies or upgrade current ones. The maintenance piece is really important. The support that happens, security, is extremely important. And asking one person to do all of that becomes challenging. And so having them focused on a specific purpose or a specific need is really, really critical here. So the worker themselves, if it's one individual or even a team of individuals, making sure you understand what their list of responsibilities are, and that they might have specific domains where their skills play into, is really important. I'll talk about this one in a little more detail later, but one of the big ones, and one of the first ones we recommend, is something called project versus process work. So project work are those things which are usually around implementing a new software, upgrading a software, replacing a machine. They're one time, you put something in the ground or you upgrade something, and then you move on from it. And so you might not have to do that project or anything like it ever again, or for some time. And then there's process work, and process work is doing the laundry. It never really goes away. You know, on a repeated cycle, it's going to keep coming up. You have to always maintain it. Well, support tickets and the needs of individual users are like that process work. That is continued process. It needs continued attention. The questions will keep coming up. Now, if you ask an individual or even a team to do both of those, project over here, process over here, hey, every once in a while, I'm going to have to ask you to do a project, and constantly these tickets are going to come in because users need help, or these requests from users are going to come in, get them both done. What will inevitably happen is the project will get dropped, because the process work, the requests from users, will keep interrupting, and the project will never get done on time, if ever. It kind of stretches out into infinity, so to speak. And so that is one of the first recommendations we have, is to split that up. And so when we talk about purpose, an IT individual's role or purpose may be for the organization to do projects, or it may be to do those support tickets. But if you ask them to do both, just know that one or the other is going to get dropped at different points in time. So you have to be very rigid on scheduling, or make sure there's a release valve for when those things come up. And even if you have two people on the team, you likely are going to want to have one that's dedicated more to projects and one that's dedicated more to just repeated service work or otherwise, or find a way to accomplish that. But you need to make sure the roles, even if they have some overlap, have a core responsibility. And that core responsibility can be kind of led back to purpose. Okay, I'm going to give a little more context related to that later, but we're going to talk again about the technology need. And so this is a diagram that we've used for years and years and years. And this is called above and below the line. Now, the idea behind this is for us to be able to meet with organizations and talk to them about what actually goes into IT, and why certain resources get things done versus other resources getting things done, and why sometimes it works well and why sometimes it doesn't. And so I'll talk through this briefly, and kind of speed up that conversation. But if you look at this at a glance, basically everything that's below that dotted line, that's kind of cut right through the middle of the chart, is the core infrastructure and services that you need to just run the business. Okay. And so if you think about infrastructure itself, that means the physical embodiment in a lot of cases of the infrastructure. It's things like firewalls, it's things like switches, it's the technology that gets people connected, and in some cases servers and otherwise, which run the services that you're using. So if you have stuff on-prem, meaning you have servers in a server room, or you have stuff in the cloud, meaning you're attaching to cloud services, that's all still infrastructure. And that infrastructure, doesn't matter really where it is, needs to be supported. Those services need to run. It needs to have good security, but inherently it doesn't really offer any value other than to allow people to get connected to do their jobs. And so when we talk about that, everything really below that line is more cost driven. Now, the security in it, the support in it, all of that, you're just kind of keeping the wheels on, so to speak. We, in some ways, we call that the basic blocking and tackling. Everything above the line starts to drive value, but you can't do that without that strong foundation. So you need the infrastructure working well. Without it, everything above that dotted line, which can drive value, things like collaboration, BI reporting, just the database systems you're using, again, whether they're on-prem or in the cloud, it doesn't matter. You need to be able to use those systems to drive the mission, vision of the business. Can't do that without a solid infrastructure there. And oftentimes when the first or initial IT people are hired, even just the IT people that work for an organization, they're focused very heavily on that below the line stuff, because if the below the line stuff doesn't happen, the above the line stuff simply can't. And you will have a lot of inconsistency. You kind of have solutions all over the place, people downloading their own stuff, just try to make something work. Whereas if you can build that solid foundation, you can build upon it, start to get more strategic and planful about how you can use your line of business applications, how you can use reporting, BI, all of those pieces. And so our encouragement is always, when you think about purpose, just know those definitions and those accomplishments that need to be achieved related to, keeping the infrastructure and the wheels on. That still has to be done. Find a way to accomplish that. And then you can go above the line, where often the business is coming in saying, we need good BI reporting. We need to get the ability to get information out of our systems. And sometimes the systems themselves or the infrastructure needs a lot of work to be up to snuff. So if you hire a person into that system, they wind up spending a lot of time putting, I wouldn't say band-aids on, but having to spend a lot of time below that line to resolve those issues, to unlock what the business actually wants. So that has to be done first before you can move on. So just make sure in regards to purpose that that's known. And there's ways to do that. If you look at those things below the line in particular, assessing your network regularly is an important one, just to know where you stand. So having the ability to do that, to know where your general health is and then drive it forward, is really, really critical. Okay. So I'm going to leave this behind. I hustled through that. We can talk more about this if there's any additional questions, but this is just to help set some context behind, from a high level, what goes into it, what has to be maintained to keep the wheels on. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about purpose here. Now I've got a lot of information and the print came across kind of small, and I'm going to go through an exercise that we do with organizations. And so I'll just set context and give an example. Businesses will come to us because they have an IT person that they don't believe is working out. That, hey, we are thinking about either replacing this person or trying to make a decision around what to do. We're having a lot of pain related to it. Sometimes it's something like communication issues, like they can't get information out of the individual, or they don't know what they're doing all day. And sometimes it's because that IT person and what they're focused on is the wrong thing. So they're getting some work done, but they don't seem to prioritize in the right way. And often it's just generally the business doesn't know what the IT person is doing. They just know certain things aren't getting done. I expected this to get done. I don't know what the IT person does. They say they're busy. I'm not sure what's actually getting accomplished. Now, as mentioned before, IT being so vast and the technology landscape in a business being so vast, there's so many jobs that need to get done. So think about purpose in relation to what the purpose of the role is. Purpose helps guide things like building a job description. I want the purpose of this individual to be to serve our users. They're going to do help desk work. Well, you can build a job description around that. But as you keep adding things in there, you increase the number of jobs that need to get done. And with the increase of jobs and the number of responsibilities that person has, the likelihood of failure increases from there. And not only that, the likelihood that they'll leave increases from there. And so understanding the jobs to be done is critical. So you can build a job description around that. So again, I'll roll back a little bit and I'm going to reference this again later, but separating project process work is a very, very critical item, because it's going to be really hard for that person to be successful in their role if they're having to do projects at the same time they're trying to do the repeatable service tickets or otherwise. In fact, they probably won't bring that up. They'll like the fact that they have the ability to do projects, but they won't get done. The projects will just keep dragging into the future. And so understanding what they are responsible for on a day-to-day basis needs to feed into the job description, and you need to make sure the job description is attainable. So when we go through that, the exercise we do with organizations is understanding the jobs to be done. And this is just a high-level view of how we look at what needs to get done with IT. This isn't everything. It's just for a small business, it's the main things that need to get completed. So you can use some of this information to understand what specific jobs you want your IT person to work on, but knowing that all of this stuff in some way, shape, or form needs to get done eventually. So I'll bring up this this diagram here. Now, this is an exercise that I actually went through and did with a client recently. The highlighted sections were those sections that they didn't feel that their IT person was getting done on a regular basis. And so the highlighted sections were the ones that needed attention. I had a graphic in here that was too dark, so I omitted it. But the white sections used to be dark, and they indicated the things that they believed were getting done. So this is a snapshot. There's another slide after this which covers off on even more. But this is a baseline exercise we do with our clients to just understand what is actually being done. So first part is current state and the state of the state. You need an assessment to know the technology in your business and what it's doing. And so this will feed into what your person or your IT individual is doing. And so if you look at the very bottom line and correlate it to the kind of the bigger section up above that says infrastructure support, those are all the jobs that need to happen. So the organization that I was talking to had an IT director, and that IT director not only was in charge of IT, they were also doing on-prem work. So they were doing support tickets. They were doing the on-site proactive work. So they were doing the maintenance. And then they were also doing the reactive visits. So in the event that a user needed help, they could run over to that user, whether they were home or what have you, and take care of them. They didn't have a lifeline to go to get additional remote support. So there's no help desk for these people to call. They literally had to wait for the IT person. And then they didn't have tools to use. It was, this individual was doing the work. Projects would have to be outsourced, so they were going somewhere else to get those projects done. But the IT person was expected to make sure that it got completed successfully. And then when we talk about the middle one here, I'm kind of jumping around, but the section in orange, this network capabilities, is the ability to troubleshoot higher end networking stuff. So firewall isn't working, switch isn't working, and otherwise. Now you go to the end part here, just the backup itself. They didn't have testing in place. They didn't know that there was any backup monitoring in place, but they were planning. So the IT person was doing a lot of the planning. And that's an example of one of those projects. So that IT individual, that IT director spent a lot of time planning out what the right solution for backup was. A lot of time putting the thought into what needed to get done. Meanwhile, it wasn't being done to the business's need, and which creates a huge security risk and gap moving forward. And so that is an example of, if you don't have these jobs all need to get done in some way, shape, or form. Somebody's got to do projects for IT in your business. You've got to have somebody minding the store. That little knock wedge in there is somebody actually looking at your network operations on a regular basis. Tools are the best way to do that versus checking it by hand. So there's an investment in tools that needs to happen. So whether you do this yourself or whether or not you look for another organization to help, you need to find a way to solve all of this. You got to have a good backup in place. Your users should have the ability to call a help desk. They need to be unimpeded to the best of their ability and should be able to get somebody immediately. And then as we look through moving into the future and planning out things like backup, disaster recovery, somebody's got to watch all of that. So somebody has to make sure if backup isn't working, that it gets resolved quickly. And again, reassessing on a regular basis helps you understand where you're at and where you're going. So having just a scorecard to a certain degree, knowing what things look like and what they should look like is really important. So I kind of flipped the script on this next one because they were planning on hiring a security professional. And so the idea behind this was, well, if you're going to bring in a security professional, and this is cloud and security, but heavily weighted based on the security needs, we were trying to build a job description in this case for which items, if they were going to hire a security professional, they needed to be responsible for. And so whether or not your technology is on-prem or in the cloud, your IT person or IT team needs to make sure that it's being secured. That doesn't mean it just goes away. So there has to be baseline security policies, advanced security. Somebody's got to manage those policies. People are going to be collaborating within those tools, obviously. You got to make sure permission, security, and content is protected. And then when we think about kind of that next technology security segment, that's just all the general security stuff with somebody overseeing it, security officer or otherwise, to make sure that your business is protected. So doing a regular assessment, making sure there's people watching for those alerts, making sure you've got a tool in place that's monitoring that, so that the EDR SIM tool, those are monitoring tools that you put in place, as well as remediation tools that can help fix things. Whitelisting, content filtering, that's all ways of protecting you. And then obviously, if the business has compliance, regulatory compliance needs, this all needs to feed into that as well. So all these jobs need to get completed. And the expectation, I'll just flip back for a second, when hiring an IT person, the first IT person, is some way, shape, or form, all of this is going to get done. So when the person is asked to complete all of this, it becomes too much. So knowing what you want as the purposeful job is incredibly important. Our strong urging or strong recommendation is for your first IT hire, you find a coachable, trainable individual that gets really good at these kind of light blue on the left-hand side, remote support capabilities, on-prem, service coverage, proactive and reactive work. They get really good at that because that's going to serve the needs of your users. The users will like the IT experience when they have somebody either show up to the desk or give them a call that knows and works for the business. And it allows them to cut their teeth and grow with the business. Then you can make a decision after they've taken on those responsibilities or otherwise on whether or not, through training and education, which we'll talk about in a little bit, whether or not they can make the leap to doing more of that above the line work, which is help around what the business actually needs, collaboration, putting in additional tools, line of business app migrations, updates, all of that stuff becomes unlocked when you have an individual that gets really good working with users, and then you can move them up to the above the line tasks. Because again, remember, the below the line tasks are more cost driven. So keeping the infrastructure working, most of what we're looking at right here is cost driven. This is just keeping the wheels on. And usually the IT person is asked to do all of this and something gets dropped. And so if you have a team, make sure they're focused in certain domains or specialties, and just know that all of this needs to get done in some way, shape, or form. And there's plenty of automation and tools and otherwise that allow you to unlock this. So that individual coming in might already have experience with it. Organizations like us extend our tools. There's plenty of options there, but you can cut out a lot of the day-to-day and really focus on the user experience. Sorry, I'm going to go ahead again here. And again, the idea is we're looking for the jobs to be done that would be fed into their job description and give them purpose in their role, knowing that not everything can get completed. If you slap, hey, you're IT director, but you're also doing help desk and you're overseeing our backup, and by the way, you're overseeing all of our security, that gets too big. And it's almost impossible for anybody to be specialist in all those areas and support the business well. But they can grow into those roles and we can backfill some of it. But the idea is to start them out and grow with the business as they move forward. Okay. Let's talk about some of the specific reasons to hire an IT resource. This is your first IT hire or you needed an IT resource. These are items that usually, regardless of the purpose or the other jobs to be done that we mentioned, this is kind of the accelerant to say, yes, I need a person right away. So when you're looking at this short bulleted list, these are specific items that, yes, I have to plug a person in because I have to solve this problem. So I need to hire somebody for it. It might be too much of a business need. So desk side support is what I mentioned, number one. That means you're looking for a person every day that's available to go somewhere. I need to go out to somebody's house. I need to be in the office. I need to fix the, like, they have to be present. They have to be there. If you're looking for a constant, I always have somebody on call to run out somewhere, you got to hire. There's almost no other way to do that. You could find a temp worker if it's something that's a specific need for a short period of time, which I allude to in bullet 4 there. But if you're looking for basic desk side support, hiring is really the only key answer you would need there to offer a good experience. You might have a specialized technology. This is usually a line of business app. It's super valuable to the business. It needs constant attention. That's a good reason to hire. And oftentimes you can find somebody with some of that experience, but you might have to groom them up. They'll have to work with vendors. They get very specialized and nuanced in, I need the tool to be upgraded like this. I know how to run the reports. I can feed the business this information that it's requiring, but I have to stay nuanced in this particular technology or vertical. So that is another reason to kind of, hey, hiring's about the only way you're going to solve that really effectively. And that might be short term because that app or otherwise could evolve to the point where that's not needed anymore. You might have an internal offering where you're extending technology services to other businesses. And so if it's an extension of that, you usually want to have some fallback. So one person usually doesn't cut it here. You're either going to want to have a partnership with another organization, MSP or otherwise, or you're going to have to build a bigger team, which will increase expense to the business. And if you're looking to augment that and extend it to clients, you should at least have a person internally that's helping facilitate that. I mentioned this one before, accelerating short term. This could be a big project. Hey, we got a project that's going to be going on all year. I'm going to hire a person in to help us accelerate that project in particular. Again, going back to jobs to be done, there's a project one in there. You might just be hiring for that in particular. There could be an M&A strategy. You're on an extreme growth strategy. You're acquiring organizations on a yearly cadence. That the backdrop behind all the technology work that has to happen to merge organizations and businesses, it requires somebody to be able to travel out there, do the reconnaissance, make sure the tech is ready to be merged, and then it usually gets rushed at the end, but you want to have that specifically defined. Now, again, if you're looking at what we talked about before, the purpose and the jobs to be done, these are all specific things that which might fit into a job description. You might be hiring for specifically this. But if this is what you need, make sure it doesn't get twisted with the other things that you want to have accomplished. Because if you're going to ask more of them than these specific needs, your need will get diluted. And so with IT, with almost any role, it's just very important that they have their specific purpose. 80% of their time is spent on that. The other 20% can be handled for other stuff. So if it fits in that 20% bucket, then maybe, but you want to make sure that their job description matches up with what they actually do. And what we see is a lot of times, in relation to this, they will bring somebody in to do desk side support, and then projects will start sneaking in, and the desk side support will start to decrease, and users won't have as good of an experience. So it's very important to stay on that track. All right, talk just briefly about hiring. So I'm going to skip the sourcing question, and I'm just going to tell you all that candidates for technology roles are pretty slim right now. After this, I'm going to talk about how to manage those employees. All of this leading up and where we're at right now is really purpose and thinking about that. I hope that spurs some thoughts about maybe if you have an IT person, what you see their purpose being right now. And some of that might have to be undone from where they came in and where they're at, and redefining job descriptions. That's all important work to make sure they understand their purpose. And it's very important from a retention standpoint. Not having that will accelerate them leaving the organization. So it's important that they know what they're responsible for. They have to feel successful. So these are 5 questions I ask in every interview. If I'm helping an organization find an IT person, these are the baseline questions I ask to make sure that they are from a very high level, that we're covering off on some of the need. I would extend and offer this to you all and ask that if you do interview internally for your own IT resource or otherwise, that you add these all to it. So a quick one is kind of the tell me about yourself. You're looking at their resume, you can make some sense of it, but some of it you can't make heads or tails of. Just, hey, can you bring this to life for me? Really important. Let them tell the story. Ask about what the day in the life looked like for them when they were at their last job. Make sure it correlates with what you want, or it has some overlap where maybe you can coach somebody into what you're looking for. Then, what do they want to do is really the next question. But you had a magic wand. How would you create your role? What would it look like? You're trying to pick up on a few specific things there. One, do they want to work with people? Which, very important, hard to find. Finding an IT individual that's really people focused. When you do find them and they have some technology skill, those are great additions for individuals that can be groomed into a system, work well with users, and then be groomed up. Technology becomes the next important factor if they already have the customer service, which means education is really important. And so that's where that layers into this next one. Like, are they personally investing in anything for their education? Are they putting themselves through school? Have they been taking certifications? They've been spending a lot of time. So the investment doesn't necessarily have to be money. It could be, do you actually spend time learning this stuff? Or do you just tell me you watch a bunch of YouTube videos and read a bunch of websites? That's good, but it doesn't really put the container around, I'm moving this in a direction. It's kind of a little too loosey-goosey. So you want to make sure that we've got to get this to a point where they actually have a formalized thought around how they think about continuing their education. But then I ask them a very common question. My internet's not working at home. Help me fix it. And I want to see what their approach is if I'm their customer. I want to see how they talk to me. I want to get an understanding of that. And it gives me a key into how they think about customer service. Some individual will just kind of blow past it and say things like, I guess just reboot your router. And like, well, how might I find that? What does it look like? So I'll ask those follow-up things as though I'm trying to envision I'm at home and this is happening. I want them to talk me through it. It helps me understand if they can work with a user, regardless of whether or not they might have that as their purpose. It's really important because eventually at some point they're likely going to have to work with one of my peers or somebody at my organization. So I want to know that they have that capability and like to do it, know how to do it. And then finally, I just ask them what they're strongest at. I don't ask about weaknesses because I think people twist those answers too much. But hey, where do you feel you're most proficient? And I'm looking for key words there. Things like, hey, I'm really good at Microsoft 365. Like, oh, okay, we use that. Now I can make a correlation there. Or the organization that I'm trying to help hire for, they use that. Well, tell me what you've done with it. So those types of things, I want to get an understanding of what they feel they're good at. It could be customer service, and that's good too. So those follow-ups and making sure that continuation of the conversation into what you want for your job to be done and the purpose of the role, combined with what they want to do, the marriage of those two, and knowing they have got good customer service skills and actually care about continuing education, really important. So this part, just even asking these questions, is usually about half the interview because it will spin off a lot of additional questions. All right, let's move forward a little bit here. And so I've got about 10 more slides left, so I'm gonna buzz through them. But this is what we usually hear. These questions come up from organizations, don't know what they're doing all day. When are they available to help me? And it's because the organization hasn't defined the jobs to be done for them. And so my counter is, well, what do you have them doing? How do you make sure they're getting the role done? What do you see as success for them? And it can't just be technology keeps working. That might be a necessary output of it, but you've got to take the tactics and apply the skills to get to that point. So what are they doing for tactics and skills to make sure that they're there? And then there's obviously fear. If the person isn't doing well and they think they might have to part ways, and I'll talk about this in a second, they don't want them to walk out with all their passwords. So that's a risk to the business. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So let's skip ahead to actually managing the resource. You have an IT person. Person is on staff. You're having a struggle communicating with them. They'll sit down with you in the interview, or not in the interview, but in a one-on-one or something like that, or just a normal meeting with them. And they'll talk about all this technology stuff and you don't know what they're referencing. There might be a concern the business doesn't know what they're referencing. You don't actually know what's being solved. There's kind of two key ways to address that. And this format that I have in here is what I recommend for anybody For general one-on-ones, it works great. You just have to change some of the positions in the first, next, and last 10 minutes of the interview and just break it into thirds. So you might be a little bit different topics or otherwise, but you can use the format. But number one, they got to document what they do. It is going to be really hard to get them to want to document what they do. They are not going to want to document what they do. They want to fix. And so if you have an IT resource, you need a system or an ability, even if it's just, hey, this Excel doc, I'm not trying to micromanage or track your time. I just need to know the high level items that you worked on. And then eventually, if there's enough volume, you probably want to get something like a ticketing system so they know, you know what tickets they're working on. Like, I worked with this user and this is what I did, that sort of stuff. Then you have a reference point to go back and verify either things getting done or that they're spending their time doing those support tickets if that's what you're looking for. Finding a way for them to log their time in that is another level of challenge. Just starting out, you just want to make sure they're bulleting out what they're doing. And I do an exercise with the IT person. I call it best use of time. Best use of time, I just draw a pie chart and I say, let's talk about the high level things you work on a week to week basis. And let's just do base percentages. Are you spending 20% of your time here, 10% here? And often what we'll find out is they spend a lot of time on things other than their purpose. They're expected to be a help desk person, but they spend a ton of time setting up conference rooms. Okay, well, I didn't know that 20% of your time was just to prepare the business for meetings. If that's important to the business, let's make sure that it's known that that needs to get done. We'll find a way to get that accomplished, but this other stuff has to go somewhere too if you're going to be spending an entire day a week doing that, running around. And it interrupts things. So if they're supposed to be doing help desk and then they have to go set up a conference room and then help desk pops up, they're going to be slow at both of them. So just making sure that balances out. But get them to document what they do. Also, you want them to document what they work on too. So you need a system that collects that. Without that, if they walk, you don't have anything. The one-on-ones, I'm going to skip to the third one here, but basically they can talk about anything. Hey, these are my roadblocks, this is what I'm working on. This is what I did this weekend. That's fine. But you want to get to the point where you're driving their career path. If you don't do this, they will usually leave, but center it around education. You came in under these auspices, this is your job description. In a year or two, here's where this could turn into. You've got to always have that conversation, even on a weekly basis. The reminder has to come up, like, hey, are you working on this? How are you feeling about your cert? Looking at going down the Microsoft track, And then lastly, project process is almost always the first thing we hear as a problem. Hey, I was working on this. You had me set up 10 laptops and now I couldn't get to these tickets. So I had to stop doing the laptop setup and that's due on Friday. And there's no way I can get it done if I'm gonna have to do those tickets. Making sure you understand where they're coming from and make sure they have time set aside to do each of them so they can be successful is really important. All right. Thumb ahead here. I'm going through this quickly, but right now there's a technology worker shortage. The churn rate in IT is almost the highest across all job types. So it's over 13% a year. Finding an IT resource. So if you lose an IT resource, you can expect that it's going to be a minimum of 51 days to find an entry-level resource. If you're looking for something above that level, you want somebody that's more level 2 working on higher level stuff, or you're looking for an IT director, it's going to go up from there. And the average tenure of entry-level IT workers is 14 months. So that's current. I pulled this information last week. So what we see is that the IT churn over the last couple of years has gone up. So we're seeing more activity in the market because there's a lot more opportunity even for an entry-level worker to take a higher level position. So those things exist. If you don't foster the relationship and give them purpose, they will leave faster, but expect that you've got this timer running when you have an entry-level person. You either have to solve to move them into a role that they want to go to or wanting to, like, new experience or capabilities they're looking to unlock, probably with more comp, or have a game plan for when they leave. So if you can't solve that, they're likely going to leave unless you can give it to them within their organization or your current organization. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the actual event. If you haven't had them documenting, if you haven't kept track of passwords and things like that, and just said IT person is handling it, that's going to be challenging when they leave. Now, it's It's fairly rare that the IT person will do something malicious, from my experience, that they'll walk out because they know the repercussions of it having worked in it. However, it puts the business in a crunch because if they don't want to talk to you anymore, it's really hard to get this information out of them, and it can cause pain in between time. So knowing where the documentation is, passwords in particular, what they're working on actively, whether it's projects or tickets or what have you, and what they worked on in the past. So you've got some sort of track record of what they did is really, really important. And again, even if it's just Excel for now, that's important, but making sure they have a system to track this. If you don't have it and they leave, it's just really hard to work backwards and piece this together. And now when I say the password piece, this doesn't mean that you know all the passwords right alongside of them. What we recommend is something called a break glass account, which is another account that people don't use, but has the ability at any given moment in time, if something happens where you can't get the normal access, you can break into this account and see your passwords. And it's something that would be only reserved to maybe the executives in the organization, so they know how to do that. Or you work with an IT person, they'll teach you how to do that, but you have the ability to at any point get into the system and see the passwords, but it's not used on a day-to-day basis, which you don't want access to passwords to spread beyond IT and exec if you can help it. Next thing, and this helps from a hiring perspective and all of it, just have a backup relationship. Could be an individual. We recommend obviously having an MSP for that. So if you have an MSP, you have a team that's backing you that can plug in and help augment the gaps that might be opened up if the individual leaves. And so you want to make sure that unless something pretty significant is happening, you get this lined up before they go. So having the documentation, if you got a relationship in the backdrop, that's awesome. If there's shared access to passwords with that relationship, you're covered from that perspective. There might be a few gaps, but at least you know that you've got something to fall back on. Now, for the purposes of an IT person, you're looking at acquiring them, retaining them, and then augmenting your capabilities. And so as an MSP, we help with whether it's the coaching, finding a resource, training a resource. We work with organizations to help drive some of that behavior or change. And so our work is often something called co-manage, which I'll talk about more in a second. We know turnover happens. It's incredibly frequent. There is a lot of organizations that their IT person is there for a year or two, and the business wasn't expecting that. There's just a lot of questions after they leave, and you're kind of picking up the pieces. And so a part of this is just making sure if you're having those one-on-ones, if you've assigned purpose and assigned jobs to be done, you know what they're working on and what they're responsible for. Have that documented in their job description, have expectations for them, meet with them weekly. Got to have these conversations. They're critical. And just ask them what they're working on. They're usually excited to talk about what they're doing. And some of it might not be exactly translatable depending on who's meeting with them or what the conversation is. But you want to get to the point where, okay, these are your initiatives. Let's go through best use of time. Where are you spending your time? All right. Okay, you're spending a lot of time working on this. That is not a part of your purpose in your role. We've got to figure out what to do with that. I'll take that on as your manager or leader. But let's get you back to what we expect you to be working on to drive the initiatives we're looking to have done. So when we step in, usually a lot of this is already transpired, and we're working to help coach the person up. Usually when we step in, and if they have an IT person they're not satisfied with, we say, give us some time with them so we can see if they are the right resource for what you're expecting. And we'll just give that feedback. It's our goal to have that person stay on with the team because they add a lot of value. They know the organization oftentimes, and they can help drive some of these changes in line of business apps and all of that. So we want to help make them successful. And so it's our goal to help. Here's tools that can help you be more successful. You can lean on us if you need to escalate, things like that come up. And it doesn't matter the level. We've got kind of all the tiers there. So I want to talk about that in the sense of, what co-managed is. So co-managed is about sharing the responsibility of IT and all those jobs to be done across individuals and organizations. And so instead of one person being responsible for everything or one organization being responsible for everything, you go through the jobs to be done and make sure the roles are assigned out with little overlap. So you know there's coverage there on all sides, but things like when I say the blocking and tackling, it's that basic infrastructure stuff, keeping the lights on, making sure the systems are working, and that those other jobs are assigned out. So often what happens is we start out doing an MSP or us coming into an organization, we're doing some of the higher level stuff, and they bring in an individual, or organization brings in an individual to do lower level stuff, and eventually they succeed in their role, and we move back to handling the initial calls and otherwise, and their IT person can then work through the system and be successful, working to the point where they get above the line and benefit the business, and all the basic infrastructure stuff is done. It helps as a short-term accelerant, it helps the business get back on track, and now you have a coached, trained individual that's with the organization. And if they do leave, you've got somebody who's worked through those systems, so you know how that can work in the event that you're looking to backfill. So the couple-month window you might have to find somebody, you're covered. Again, we extend tools, capabilities, and the biggest thing here is if you're going out to market right now trying to find somebody to handle your security, you're likely not going to find it. Security professionals are really not available on the wider market. You either got to build it yourself or you've got to outsource it. And so that is, for us, from our perspective, we're usually handling security for organizations, and their IT staff is handling kind of the day-to-day once they grow to that level. Also, with an MSP or even with internal IT, you've got the ability to throttle up and down. So if you need more resource in one area versus the other, we can flex there, and you can flex your internal team to make sure the coverage is aligned. And again, it helps with some of that fallback capability. So there's this chart here that we've used in the past. I know it may be hard to read with the color here, but when you're thinking about hiring or what you should have in terms of the roles, how we augment these capabilities, when we're looking at organizations that, I want you to just focus on kind of the top half of this, they're less than 10, they're usually doing it on their own. All the people that work for the organization are just calling their own help desk lines, their own vendors. So it usually doesn't drive a real need for an IT person or an organization to work with until they grow to the point where they're getting close to 20 users, where they'll outsource all of IT and just not handle it. I've got my help desk here and my help desk here, that's it. Now, when it's getting to the point where they are getting to 50 plus users, then the need for hiring an internal IT person becomes more apparent. Now, that bulleted 5 list that I gave before might supersede this, but for the most part, when you're between that 50 and 70 users, you're kind of deciding whether or not you need an IT person. Now, our role in that scenario is usually we're the IT director. So a fractional IT director helps shape up what the IT hire might look like, and they usually bring in an entry-level person. Again, with the right job description, they're handling their jobs to be done, and they're accelerating through the organization with the intent that they grow with the organization. And knowing that there's that timer there, you've got about 2 years to get them into a role, which makes the most sense on average. So you might find a diamond in the rough there, but you can't really depend on that. Now, once you get to the point where you're getting over 70 to 100 users, you're going to likely need more resources when you get 100 plus. And so when you're looking at internally, that's when you're going to need an IT team. So a really good rule of thumb here is the 100 users almost always needs at least one IT person to handle kind of baseline support and otherwise. And when you get above that, you're looking at maybe specializing and having a secondary resource there, depending on what jobs to be done are consistent. Now, what we do is we augment the other capabilities. We can help supply security resources. We can supply technicians on site as needed and ramp that up. We also do these fractional roles, fractional security, the CISO, fractional IT director, which help give some guidance on putting shape around it, helping drive that forward. And then we've got some other pieces here around how to think about spend on a month-to-month basis when you're looking at that. So when we step into an organization, what we do and why MSPs exist is for less than or equivalent to the cost of an FTE, we can handle IT infrastructure support and then security and otherwise. If you're looking to hire one person to do all of that, it usually isn't possible. So you want to share that responsibility depending on the growth of the organization. And that's how we pair up and help tailor the co-managed need to the organization. So, all right, just some kind of last thoughts about thinking about when you hire, when you outsource. Again, this kind of goes back to the 5 bullets that I listed before, but you might have specific needs which require you to hire a person, Deskside Support, a special line of business app, etc. If you need that, hiring is important, but you've got to find the right person. If you're looking to assess skills, which is a big part of this, obviously, you're going to want a peer, somebody to help understand that level of skill from that client, or sorry, that prospect. So when you're working with somebody and you're working with an MSP, or you have somebody that knows how to assess IT skills, you can get more particular about what you're looking to solve and whether or not it's working. So it's just really important to have that other layer. All those 5 questions I gave before are really important to help know whether or not they're a good fit, but then you need somebody to kind of validate that they have those skills there. So if your organization is growing, you're looking to hire, you want to have the ability to elevate them. It's good to have a backdrop there instead of scrambling to hire and backfill. And, uptime might be critical to the point where, we can help as an MSP watch the day-to-day, get alerts if issues are going on where one person or even two people can't mind the store all the time. And they might have specialized roles moving up through the organization. Now, my final thoughts here are really the overarching goal here is to make technology a strategic initiative in your business. Hiring an IT person helps you along that journey. But know that when you're going through this journey, these 5 phases laid out here, the assess, fix and finish, short-term, long-term, strategic, it's almost every organization goes through this in some way, shape, or form. You need to assess and know where you're at. You're going to find a lot of projects that need to get done. We call that technical debt. Sometimes something's on fire and needs to be taken care of. That's a fix and finish phase. We take care of what's out there. Your internal IT person might be in the middle of that phase and they'll need backup as they go through it. That's why businesses like ours exist. So it's things like that to make sure that you're going through these phases to get to the point where you can do short-term planning. If you try to plan strategic initiatives without having the fix and finish done, they will keep falling flat because you can't get an appropriate timeline or know when things are being accomplished. So you have these aspirations that just keep hanging out there, but the infrastructure won't be solid enough to support it, and the business will keep being disappointed. So our intent here is to work with organizations when they have an IT person or they don't have an IT person, take them through these phases, get to the point where they're doing real long-term planning. We've got executive sponsorship and the strategic initiatives start getting accomplished. So having an IT person internally helps you with this process. And so if you're at the growth size where you need it, just make sure you know their responsibilities and not the expectation can't be that they handle everything. So knowing how everything is going to get done is important. That kind of refers back to those total jobs to be done. If there's follow-up questions that you may want to have answered, please feel free to reach out. We can help set up a conversation or otherwise maybe answer some of the questions you might have around staffing for IT, or if you got an IT person you're looking to work with and get some tips.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Jamie, and thank you to all of our guests for joining today. This event was recorded and we will be sending a follow-up email with the link so you can go back and watch if you'd like. That's all we have for you. Thanks again and have a great afternoon, everyone.